Welcome everyone to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and today we're going to continue the HIVE CMS Admin Learning Series. And this, to some of you, may feel like one of the more important topics. We're going to be covering how to process in Revit content. We're going to talk about a couple of other kinds of content as well, just to show that it's very similar in some cases, but we're going to be focusing primarily in today's discussion about Revit content. Now, as always, all of our webinars are recorded, so you can view this and the other admin learning series on our YouTube channel. If you're viewing this after the webinar has been done, certainly feel free to subscribe to the channel so that you can get notified when these new webinars get posted. But also, watch our events page because you get to participate with us live in these webinars, which leads me to the second point. As always, we encourage you to ask questions about today's topic while you're here live. Feel free to throw them in the questions window, and I will do my best throughout the webinar to answer them live if they're relevant to what we're talking about at the time. And if not, we certainly have a huge Q&A session typically reserved at the end, and we do that today as well. So let's jump in and cover what today's topic is going to be about. Adding content to HIVE really is one of the major last steps in preparing your HIVE CMS before really inviting all of your users. Now, we've already talked about user invitations and adding users and managing users in groups in previous discussion, but you want to kind of get this HIVE CMS and the content added all set up really before inviting the masses to using this browsing tool. Now, most of the files that we're going to be working with, and we're going to show some examples of that today, are really easy to add into HIVE. But some Revit content has some special controls. Well, all Revit content has special controls and special needs specific to how it gets loaded in. We're going to talk about that and what nuances you may care about today. We're going to dig deep into adding both component family files and some of the details about it and system family files from Revit Projects. And like I mentioned, we're also going to add a couple of other files just to show you, how the process is a little bit different, just a little bit different. So you understand the nuances and what you want to care about when you're adding Revit content into HIVE. Those of you who might be AutoCAD-centric users, this is similar for AutoCAD, but a little bit different. So we're going to have an AutoCAD special session a little later on how to add AutoCAD content specifically into HIVE as well. In today's discussion, I'm going to go over four major things. We're going to talk about some different Revit content types or content types in general. We are going to process specifically component families into the HIVE CMS. We are also going to process some hosted content into the HIVE CMS. And we're going to really talk about some things that you can do to plan for updating and maintaining your content that is already processed into HIVE. It's very similar to the original two processes that we're going to run for component families and system families, but there's some extra tools that you have the opportunity to use if you want to, and we'll talk about what those look like. So since I'm not big on death by PowerPoint, we're going to jump in live and take a look at some of these topics. Well, actually, first, we're going to talk about some different types of content. What are the different kinds of content that we have really at our fingertips? The first one and the most notable one is just general files, whatever file types it is that you want to put into HIVE. And I have a couple of examples here that I'll be adding in a little later today. I have some code PDF files that I'm going to throw into HIVE. PDFs are just a generic file type that you can use for, exchanging drawing information. There's just some, data inside of there. Some of us like to have our standards in PDF format. That's great. Some of us like to have our standards in DOC or DOCX format from Microsoft Word. That's fine as well, though technically it's an editable file. I would normally recommend making those PDFs. Both can be put into HIVE. Document templates, Excel files, Excel templates, all of that can be put into HIVE, and they all add the exact same way for those basic file types. Imagery, similar thing. It's just a basic file type in Windows. You can add it into HIVE, no problem. The other major kind of file type, though, is Revit family, component family files, RFAs. And this, I'm going to use the out-of-the-box Revit 2021 Imperial Library for this example today. And these are the file types that you'll notice called out as .rfas in Windows if you have your file extensions turned on. These do require some kind of special handling because with Revit, they can only be opened within the environment of Revit. There's no real controls outside of Revit, so you have to open these up in Revit. We're going to take a look at how these can be scanned and processed into the Hive space. Another file type that exists, let me see if I have an example window of this opened. I don't, but I'm going to pull one up real quick before I pull it on screen, and that would be Revit project files, project hosted content. And so we're going to be adding some of that content here as well. If I pull this across, you'll notice that there's some project files here that are templates, RTEs, or potentially RVT project files, but there's also warehouse project files. So I have a starter project here that's a starter project, but then I have my other files called out as warehouses. And these are version-specific warehouse files because typically I will be opening up these models in a certain version of Revit and transferring the project standards from one project to another. That's how I use these warehouse files. But my goal today is to actually add content from within the warehouse into Hive so that users don't have to open these files up directly. We're going to take a look at some of the nuances for that. So when we talk about an RVT, a Revit project file, they can be either a starter project template or they can be a warehouse, and they can be used in two different ways. And we'll take a look at the two different ways of adding those into the Hive space. In fact, adding starter projects is very much the same as adding a Revit family. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. And then once we're done with all that, we're going to take a look at how to manage this in the long run. So first off, let's take a look at processing general file types and component families both at the same time. So I happen to have Hive opened here, and I happen to have my library for standards and procedures already pulled up in this case. One of the things that I wanted to add to this was just a basic file before we start directly talking about processing Revit content. And so if I pull up one of these code folders here in Windows Explorer, and I find one of these files, like maybe the Minnesota Residential Energy Code PDF here, if I want to add that into standards, I simply drag and drop that into the Hive Add Content window, and I have a proper library chosen up here at the top. Those are the two requirements. You're on Add Content, and you have a right library selected. I can simply drag and drop files into this space and have it add them into this environment. You can also choose to add files individually and browse for folders that you want. Maybe I want to add this image, maybe I want to have that in Hive as a piece of content. Or I can add a folder of files here where I can browse around and find things like the entire folder of Hive images and have all of them added. Ultimately, when I click Process, it'll add these into whichever library it is I have chosen at the top. And that's the basics of adding any kind of file into the Hive CMS. Simply add the file to the processing window, make sure you have the right library chosen, and you can click Process. Now you might notice, and I'm doing this intentionally, by the way, I'm completely ignoring tags. So those of you who already have a little bit more knowledge about tags, that's fine. We're going to be talking about tagging in a future session. You can choose to add tags right here. I personally typically do not, but that's up to you. In today's example, I'm going to be completely ignoring tags while processing content, and you can certainly do the same. I'm going to remove these three files because these are not pieces of content that I really want in my standards and procedures library. This was just an example of how I could add content using add files or add folder. But my intent here is to process in the Minnesota Residential Energy Code, in this case, into the standards and procedures library. So I'm going to remove those selected files and simply process that one piece of content directly into that standards and procedures library. This will take just a second. This library is an uploaded library. It does have its content cached in the cloud. So it scanned that file, it got its properties, it uploaded it to that library, and now it's already searchable. This was a successfully processed piece of content. It knows what its source path was, and I'm basically done. That is as complicated as adding normal, regular Windows files into the Hive CMS. You put them in the window, you choose your library, you click Process, right? Now we're going to be doing that kind of procedure a number of times here, but we're going to use some different kinds of content for this next one. Let's take a look at Hive Revit families. So in the case of my doors here, I can choose to add files individually, one by one, right? I can drag and drop these files over here if I really want to. But let's be real. Normally, when you're adding content, you're probably not going to be adding things one by one when you're processing bulk amounts of content into Hive. Most likely, you're going to want to take things like the entire folder of doors, including their subfolders here. So let's take a look at how that could be added. Let me remove everything from this list for right now, just so you can see this happen in real time. I could, let me just copy this path so I don't have to browse. It won't matter, I have to browse anyway. Program data, Autodesk, where is this at? This is in the Revit 2021 folder. 21, libraries, English Imperial doors. Okay, I could choose the doors folder. I did the add folder command here. I could choose the folder and click OK. It'll scan that folder and add the files. So that's a way that you can add bulk content into Hive. Personally, though, I really don't like the add folder process. It uses Windows stock sort of folder browser, and you can do that if you want to. There's nothing wrong with using this. I just personally typically will do it this way. I find there's an easier way. In Windows Explorer, where I'm used to navigating most of the time and where I can copy and paste paths, you can simply grab a folder out here, like the doors folder, and drag and drop it into Hive, and it's the exact same thing as adding a folder. So when I'm here on the Add Content tab, I can simply drag and drop folders of content into Hive, and it will add all of the files within those folders as appropriate to Hive. When we're talking specifically about Revit families, I want to point one very specific thing out. When I drag and drop this folder, and when I have Revit, some version of Revit open, or it knows it's Revit content, Hive is intentionally scanning that folder, both with the add folder and when I drag and drop a Windows folder, for files that are text files named the exact same as a Revit family. And if it finds them, it recognizes these as type catalogs. And it does not, if you notice here, it does not add the type catalog.txt files into this list. It's smart enough to know you don't want that. You really don't. You want, when this content is scanned for that door double flush panel, you want Hive to scan through this and know what the types and the values are, but you really don't want a user searching for and finding this type catalog. So it does not scan it and add it to the list of actual browsable content. Now, if you chose specifically a type catalog and you drop that over here, Hive would add it, after a while. It would add that into the list, but you really don't want it. So don't do that, because you don't want users opening these up. It doesn't make sense. It's just going to muddy the waters of what they're going to be able to search and find. Okay. And by the way, once again, I'm completely ignoring tags. No tagging whatsoever is happening at all with what I'm doing here. I did see a question pop through about tags. This is not in any form or fashion tagging any of this content with today's processing, because I am completely ignoring the tags list up here, which is what would explicitly add any kind of tags to the content pre-process. So we're ignoring that in today's example. You can, by the way, if you really wanted to, go back to the main library here, like the English Imperial Library, and drop this into Hive, and it would process in this case, there's probably, there's 1.5 or 1.05 gig of data in that folder. In here, there are tons of subfolders. There are a few text files in this list here about keynotes, and it would add all of that into this list. I will make one thing very clear. I did not say Hive does not add text files. These would be added because there's no correlating family. These are not type catalogs. They are real data that I might want to find. So these would have been added to the list if I'd have done that. That will add about 3,500 items to the list if I was to do that, and it would take a little while to process them. So for today's example, I am not going to do that. I'm going to focus exclusively on these doors. In fact, I'm going to focus exclusively on really like 2 doors to add to my library. So I'm going to remove all in this case because I don't want everything. I'm going to go back into that doors folder, and I'm going to focus on just the door, where is it here, double door single panel and door double flush panel, which it's awesome that they don't keep the names consistent, but we come to expect that, I think, sometimes with stock content coming out of apps. So I'm going to add both of those doors. Notice I can multi-select and add both at the same time. Now, of course, this content here, I'm going to want to add to whichever library I feel is appropriate. These probably don't belong in standards and procedures. Let's use the library we created in a previous session when we were talking about building libraries. This is specialized client content, perhaps. So I'm going to put this in the Revit Content XYZ folder. I'm not going to put it in my corporate standard library because this is not my corporate standard doors. So I'm going to put this in a specialized library for whomever that is. When I click Process here in a moment, I want to point something very specific out about this. Notice how this door family and this door family, these two RFAs right here, they're noted in version 21. The Revit version design app that I have open right now is Revit 2022. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can process normal Revit family content, and you can even process templates if you want to. If I was to jump back to that other folder over here in my little Hive sample folder, I've got this A18 starter project CTC. That's my starter project template. I could drop that over here if I wanted to and process this also in Revit 2022. I don't have to process this in 2018. Now, it's going to take just a little bit longer because it's going to have to upgrade this file before it can actually scan it and know its properties. And these files here also have to upgrade them, but these are tiny files. They'll upgrade super fast. But it's going to have to upgrade them before it scans them. Then it'll scan them. We talked in one of our previous session about the content processor settings and preview graphics. It will generate the preview graphics for these as appropriate. Then it will close those files without doing any saving, and it's going to upload them to the library if this is an uploadable library, and mine is. Now, I'm going to remove this one because I don't want to wait for this project to upgrade. It's a pretty small file. It's only about 2.5 meg, but I don't want to wait for that. So I am very intentionally going to remove this from the list, and I'm going to just process those two doors. This will use my active Revit session back here in Revit 2022. It's going to process in that session. It's going to scan those two files, each one of them, upgrade them, check their type catalogs if they have type catalogs, and then when it's all done, as it did just now, it comes back, both of these were successfully processed. If for some reason there was an error in the families, maybe they had some goofball stuff going on, it would let me know that, but these have all been processed, and they are now in that Revit Content XYZ library. They are in that library as Revit 2021 content, even though I processed it from the version of Revit 2022. So I can process in the current or future versions, not a problem when I'm processing RFAs or templates or starter projects or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't take very long. Now, if I was processing 3,500 families, on average, it takes 15 to 30 seconds per each. I would probably click process and let it run overnight, or go to a meeting, or do something else, or have a side computer. This is going to take over your Revit session as it processes that content in. It's going to scan it, process it, and it's going to take some time for that. So now let's talk about, oh, and by the way, let's just quickly verify what I just mentioned about the versioning of the content. Let's actually specifically search the Revit Content XYZ folder here. I'm going to search for absolutely everything in that folder, and it should be two things: door panel flush, or door double flush panel, and door single panel. Okay, those two are here. Those are the only two things that have been processed into this library. And if I open up and show details here, we will notice that these are coming from Revit 2021. Again, I processed it in 22, doesn't matter, it's 21, that's perfectly fine. Same thing with that double door, gives me all of its types from the type catalog and shows me the content in Revit 2021. So glorious. We're all good to go. And this also is noted as cloud hosted because I did actually successfully upload that content. That library is told to cache to the cloud. So all my settings are lining up with exactly what I would expect to have happen here. All right, hopefully we're all good so far. Now let's talk about the next kind of content, the next special content, and that is processing system families. This is a little bit different, and this is very important. So far, I've been telling you within the HIVE CMS, it does not matter what version of Revit you're working in when you're processing regular files. Doesn't matter. PDFs, doesn't matter because it doesn't affect Revit at all. Revit families, doesn't really matter as long as you can open the file in that version, you're good to go. So I usually process that stuff in the latest possible Revit version that I have installed. Templates, same thing. Starter projects, same thing. Doesn't matter the version. Now it's going to change just a little bit, and I'm going to explain why. The next kind of file, I'm going to pin Hive to the foreground here so it doesn't go behind my Revit session in this next little step. I'm going to pull forward the version of Revit 22 that I have open. You'll notice that I have my A22 warehouse model opened right now. In fact, I opened it incorrectly. I am currently opened into a local copy of this file, and I really don't want to be. I want to be opened into the actual central file itself. So I'm going to close this file. Give it a second to shut down. Oh, it's probably asking me if I want to save it. Yeah, let's relinquish all the elements and work sets. And let's reopen that file up. But this time I'm going to open this up correctly. And I have to pull this across over here. There we go. And let's go to where I have my little like demo folder out here, where I keep my stored little warehouse files. I'm going to open up this Revit 2022 warehouse right here. I'm going to not create a local. I'm not detaching it from central, but I'm not going to create a local. I want to open up the actual central file directly. Some of you might be cringing right now. Sean, don't do that. You always create a local copy. Yeah, if I'm actually making edits to something, I would create a local copy. But this is not a live production model. I don't recommend adding content out of a live production model because eventually it's going to get archived. I recommend curating very intentionally a warehouse of content that contains all of your system families, schedules, typical details, typical sheets. Put that all in one big single model. Now mine's somewhat small. It's 11 meg. Yours will probably be in the 50 to 100 meg, maybe 500 meg range. I've seen some pretty large warehouses. Nothing wrong with that. Have a nice big master file that you can manage all of those project-based standards from, and that'll save you a lot of headache. So I'm going to open up this warehouse file directly, not creating a local. Very intentionally, I'm going to open up all work sets. This is going to put me in the correct file straight away. So in a moment here, we'll see that this will update at the top here with the proper warehouse file right there. And we're going to be using this model as our basis for the system family content. Now in this file, you know, I've got a few sheets maybe with some schedules on it. I actually have some schedules themselves inside of here, schedules and quantities. I have a legend in this case that might be on a sheet. You know, I've got this little testing legend right here, maybe a drafting view at play. You know, you have drafting views in this file. This doesn't have all my typical details in it right now. I do have all my system families here, all my typical basic walls, all of my curtain walls, my stacked walls, you know, anything that I want to put into my library, that's all inside of here. Floors, railings, stairs, pipe types, you name it, it's all in this one master warehouse file. Ultimately, from this file, I'm going to be pulling content out of it and adding it over here into the Hive CMS. And the way that I'm going to do that very specifically is using the Add Revit Project elements. There is no drag and drop available for this particular workflow. It has to be done by doing Add Revit Project elements. It's going to scan my active model right here and give me a list of all of the items inside this model that I can add into Hive. It's going to be primarily listed out here by categories. You can feel free to sort based on categories here if you want to. Some people do that. Sometimes I filter for categories, like I'll type in wall right here, and it'll find me anything that matches walls. Maybe I care about walls, you know, dash basic. It'll filter down for just those types of objects, okay? Now this, I'm going to simply go through and grab all of the items that I want to process into the Hive space from this model. I'm going to select a bunch of items, check those selected items real quick here, so I don't have to check them individually one by one, and I'm going to add those elements to my processing list, okay? This is important. This version right here, version 2022, should match the version up here, at least if you're uploading your content, okay? If you're uploading the content to a library, like in the case of my XYZ library right here, or if I go to my actual Revit Content main corporate CTC library and I want to process this stuff in, make sure that you're in the correct version of Revit. And the reason why this matters here is because it's actually going to intentionally make some micro files. It's going to make a file that contains the WL interior type a 6-inch wall. That's important because if this model was 100 or 200 or 300 meg, I do not want a user to have to wait for that 100, 200, 300 meg warehouse file to cache to their computer, to cache opening in Revit's memory so that it can pull that particular wall across. I want a much smaller micro file that Hive manages when it's cloud hosted that will be super lightning quick for the end user, regardless of their internet connectivity. Even if it's relatively slow, it'll still be fairly fast, way faster than if they had to open up or cache, say, 100 or 200 meg warehouse file across a WAN connection or across a VPN connection, okay? So it's important here that this wall right here, all these walls, I'm pulling this from the correct version. So in this case, I do not mix and match versions with the active design app. If I had 2021 content, I would open up Revit 2021 and process those in their own session of Revit, in their own process. I would do this one as one, maybe one in 2020, maybe a different one in 2021, because that system family stuff is very, very version specific. Those of you in MEP, even more so, because there's a ton of new stuff and ton of new controls that are very version specific that just a basic upgrade from a previous version really wouldn't handle, not correctly at least. So you want to make sure the system family stuff is done in the proper version. Also, you know, some of the older models coming out of 2017 or 18, there's been some of those text changes, and just willy-nilly upgrading it can cause really screwy stuff with your drafting views. Don't trust it. Have a model specifically set for that proper version year with this warehouse project file. Now, before I actually continue any further, I want to point out as well, one of the reasons why I was very adamant about opening up the central file itself and not a local copy. Hive stores the path from which this content was coming. It knows in this case, this is coming from my warehouse central file. Now in my case, yeah, I'm opening it up off my local C because my demo data set is pretty much stored on my local C. I don't always stay connected to the main network. But if you've got an R drive for your Revit content, that's where it should be pointing to. And you should be opening up the file directly off of your R drive, not off your C drive. Because if it's off your C drive and it's a local copy that has your name on it, when somebody else goes through one of our future steps, it won't be able to check their system for your file underneath your profile where your local copies are stored. So this really needs to be in a central path where everybody has access to it, okay? Let me remove a bunch of this stuff so I can process fewer items. Again, we don't need to wait for all of these to process. So I'm going to go in here and grab a bunch of this stuff and remove those items and just have a couple of walls here. Like, in fact, let me remove all of this and let's reprocess just the type A walls, the most common ones that I use here. So type A, there's a bunch of those type A walls. We can sacrifice a little bit of time and get all of these in the mix. So we'll get those, what, 6 walls, I think it is, added to. I didn't check the box. Silly Sean. Type A, select, well, check all the selected, there we go, and now add them. Those 6 walls are effectively going to be added into my Revit Content CTC library. This is going to cross over just a little bit with the next topic, which is updating content, because technically all these walls are already in my CTC library. Any of you who have ever seen me do a usability demo in the past have seen me use this wall pretty frequently. This is already there, but it's in 2018. And now I'm going to have that wall in there in 2018, but also in 2022. So I'm updating that particular entry of content. But you're going to notice here the processing is really no different. I'm just going to click process here. It's going to go through all of those objects in this background model. It's going to be making some preview imagery for them. It's actually going to use the preview image as provided by the system family in Revit directly. For each one of these, it's scanning its properties, making them searchable so it knows what all of its parameters and values are. And then it's creating this little side separate model and then saving that model as an explicit file in this version of Revit and then uploading that into my library. Doesn't take super long. In this case, it's probably give or take around 10 to 15 seconds per component. These are relatively small components. If this was a sheet or if this was a drafting view, sometimes those take a little longer. But again, normally I'm not going to be sitting here watching this and babysitting this. I'm going to be just letting it run while I'm doing something else on a different computer or going to a meeting. Okay, this is almost done. We're going to see these all updated here. There they all are, successful for every single one of those. They all exist. It knows their source was the model that I was actively in right here from the C drive. In my case, from my central file. That's the more important term there. I was in my central file. And now if I go run a search for these, let's go to my corporate library right here, and let's search exclusively type A and see what shows up. There's those 6 walls. They were there before, but now we have a new Revit 2022 version to the original 2018 and 2020 versions that I'd had there before. So I have that 2022 version. I have all of its parameters for that 2022, and I could now drop that directly into any project model that I wanted, or double click on it to drop it in, or right click and force a reload of it to get the redefined version of this in my latest version, if that was something that was meaningful as well. But that's all now available here and at my fingertips. All of the content that I've processed in, things that are stuff like my typical details right here, once this refreshes, there we go. All of these typical details, they were processed in exactly the same way. I opened up their central file. I was over here on add content. It was open in my active Revit session. I did add Revit project elements. I went here to my view filters, and I told it that I wanted views, drafting views specifically, and I was able to grab those. Maybe I grabbed this Hive Test 2022 right here. Maybe I grabbed my line styles one. I can add those to the list. It would create separate views of these and throw them in my library. Okay, so that add Revit project elements works really, really well for all that project hosted content, your schedules, your sheets, your typical drafting views, and schedules on sheets, go for it. All the typical families that are system families in this environment, all of that can be added into the Hive CMS. Okay, so today we talked about adding files or folders of content. We've talked about dragging and dropping from windows. Just now we covered the add Revit project elements workflow for system family content. And now I want to talk about the last topic here, because after we've added content, there is a follow-up to this, which is updating. Oh, I should unpin Hive from the foreground here. Updating existing content that exists in your Hive. You kind of saw me do that a little bit. It's not very difficult to do. So what I want to do here is pull up Hive, and I'm going to remove everything from this list. And we are going to re-add those exact same doors that I had added before for that Revit Content XYZ library right there. We're just going to reprocess the exact same content in the exact same version again. It's stuff that's already here. Just drag and drop those 2 doors over. I know that maybe I've made some updates to these 2 here in my library. Some changes happened, whatever. I'm simply going to reprocess these and update the existing content. So it's going to look for stuff that has the exact same name. It's going to try to update that directly here. In fact, this is a brand new feature that you'll see coming out here really soon. Most of your Hives won't have this right now, but this will effectively automatically update this when I process this in. So it's going to run the process, scan those pieces of content. I should have pinned Hive back to the foreground in my case, which I didn't do. Give it a minute here. Should pop it back to the foreground once it's done. There it is. Success on both of those. You'll notice that there was absolutely nothing different that I did to update that content. It just processed it, scanned it, and uploaded on top of the existing files. It replaced them with the latest edition of those and the latest data for those. The same exact thing would hold true for adding Revit project elements. I don't have to know that it was there before. I can simply add all the things that I know are updated, check all the boxes for those, just make sure that I have the correct library chosen, but it will automatically process that content in. Now, there is another way that this update can happen. I'm going to show you exactly this other way right now. Now, to do this, I need to make an edit to one of those out-of-the-box doors. I'm going to intentionally modify one of these out-of-the-box components right here. I'm going to take the door single panel file here. I'm going to make a copy of it. I'm going to call this out as original so that I know that this was untouched so I can replace this later. I'm going to take this door right here and I'm going to modify its properties because, oh, it's already not read-only, which is glorious. Normally out-of-the-box content is read-only and I can't actually edit it, but this should be editable. And I'm going to edit this in my active Revit session right now. Simply going to double-click on it. Oh, that's in Revit 2021. Yeah, let's cancel the upgrade and let's actually open up Revit 2021. I want that in the original version of Revit. So I'm going to open up 21 to make this edit. Notice, me editing content myself, of course, I want to make sure that I'm doing those edits in the proper version. But when I'm scanning the content in Hive, if it's just a normal Revit family, I don't have to worry about the version. But editing it, saving it, actually making changes to it, of course, I want to be in the proper version of Revit in that case. So let's go ahead once again and try to open this door. Double click it. It should open up in Revit 2021 as it is. Windows is pretty good about knowing this is opened by another user. It is not. Let's continue editing this, and I'm going to do something different here. Like maybe I go into parameters, and maybe I add a brand new family parameter called Sean's custom parameter, and I'm going to make that a type property of, I don't really care here, text. It doesn't really matter, and we'll group this in other because that's probably appropriate. And now I'm going to take this Sean's custom parameter and put in something into the data for one of those types there. So we'll go ahead and do that. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. Save this file. Maybe it is still write protected. Thank you, Autodesk, for that. That is glorious. Save as family, right click, properties. Maybe there's an advanced setting. Nope. All right, well, we'll try and save over it. Maybe it's the folder. Panel, we'll call this panel 2, save. There we go. At least that's now saved. That's what I was hoping for. So I've now modified that door, and I have a panel 2 here. And so I'm going to also close that door so I can rename it. Let's close that down. Now I should be able to actually rename that back to the correct name because the name here in this next step is going to be important. This one, I already have an original copy, so I'm going to delete that. And let's rename this to panel. And I'm also, just for the fun of it, going to remove this type catalog from the mix. Let's get rid of that just so we have another reason to scan through that door. So I'm going to continue that file rename here. This now is not going to recognize that it has any kind of type catalog. It's going to scan absolutely everything from the file itself, and it's going to find that new parameter that I just made, okay? Now, let's go through another update process. You've already seen me drag and drop this into Hive. You know that I can just drop this over here. But what if I have an entire folder of stuff and I don't know what's up to date and what's not up to date? I don't know, right? Let's find out. How can I figure this out? Well, I'm going to use this export content workflow right here. This is going to let me actually scan the content that's in my current library. It's going to send me an email with that content list in it. I'm going to go over to my emails real quick here. I'm going to go get that particular file here in just a moment. And then I'm going to go through the update process to actually scan all the content that's in that XYZ library. And I'm going to use that. So I'm going to put this into my Revit demo folder here. So we can use that. I've just saved that file on the side. So now I'm going to go through the update process. I'm going to go find that file that's in my C Revit demo folder here in my Express Tools Hive folder. I've just downloaded this. This is the information from this library. There's only 2 families in that library, but that's okay. In your case, there might be thousands of families in that library. Totally fine. When I open this up, Hive is going to scan it. It's going to look at that file. It's going to look at every individual line item in there, every single file and file path. It's going to scan it to see if there's any updates. And if there is, it's going to add anything that's newer on your local system that's been updated since you last processed it into this list. Now, I have two files in that list, right? There's the door double flush panel. This one did not change. This one down here did change. It's newer. And because it's newer, it's added it to my processing list. So I don't necessarily, as an admin, I don't have to track every single file that's been, changes have been made to it. I can simply export a list of content and then tell Hive to update based on that list. And it'll add to this list every file-based family or file-based file, the PDFs, Excel files, document templates, you name it, Revit templates, to this list. And then all I have to do is reprocess it. And it's going to know what library it belonged to. It's going to know even what version of Revit that might be available, or I could pick the future version, it doesn't matter. And then when I reprocess this into the Hive space, it's going to rescan it in whatever version I've chosen, in this case 2021. And then when it's all done, Hive is going to pop back to the foreground, there it goes, successfully processing that particular content. So that's done. That's been processed into this library. And if I rerun the search on that library, let's go find everything in here. Everything that's not views, let's clear this out and rerun that search. Everything that's not, come on. There we go, not a view. This door right here now, it knows that it has those properties, and Sean's custom parameter now is in this list because it found it, that it was updated, it reprocessed it, and it added it back into this list. All done. Took me a couple of seconds to get that list, took me a couple of seconds to rescan, and now I'm off and running. So we've covered here a number of things. We've talked about the processing of specifically component families or any kind of file-based thing that you want to add into Hive. We've talked about processing the system families, and we've talked about updating the content itself, either manually by re-adding it into Hive, into the right library, or by using the export workflow and the update workflow to have it automatically scanned for changes and then added that list and reprocessed. So we've covered quite a lot about family creation. I had seen some questions pop up, and I believe I answered all of them directly. But if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them right now. If you aren't going to stick around for questions, I'm about to answer a couple that I didn't answer live, but if you're not going to stick around for questions, I totally understand. I always want to thank you all for showing up to our live webinars and interacting with us with those questions. It makes it far more interesting for us. Hopefully, it makes it far more meaningful for you. And certainly take a look at our CTC events page for all of the upcoming webinars. We have a whole bunch more of these Hive admin series and a lot more coming for the Hive user-based series as well. But now I'm going to jump back into questions here. One of the major questions I saw pop up 3 different times, and I didn't want to answer it live, but I'm going to answer it right now, was, does this work on a central file that is stored in BIM 360? The answer today is no, it does not. That's actually on our wish list. You should be seeing that come a little later on this year. You should be able to add content directly from a BIM 360 model. So if you do have content in a live work shared warehouse file, what I would recommend is save it into a consistent location locally. When you want to make those updates, overwrite whatever central file you have there in that consistent location and process out of it temporarily until we can get that actually reading live from BIM 360 models. So for now, any of those warehouse files should or need to be someplace on a drive letter mapping that you can browse to. It doesn't pull out of BIM 360 just yet. That's coming very soon, but it's not there now. I don't see any other questions showing up in the window yet. There was a question about auto tagging based on the folder name something comes from. it does not tag based on the folder it comes from. Manual tagging, I mentioned that a couple of times. We'll talk more about tagging in a future admin series, but there is no automatic tagging. All properties about the content is searchable, excluding file path, but all properties are searchable about the content. Anything that you want specially embedded in there about sub-searchability, I strongly recommend building like a keywords parameter into your family content or system family content, and then that minimizes the need to do any manual tagging if it's already built into the content itself. And it also then facilitates leveraging those keywords directly in schedules, tagging, filtering in your projects. It becomes something that's not just there for the purpose of searching in Hive. It becomes something you can use for a lot of other reasons as well within your actual Revit project model space. Generally speaking, if it's important enough to search on, it's probably important enough to filter on. And if you have it as a parameter, then you can already filter on it. You can already search on it. But we'll talk more about those types of strategies in a future session when we do talk more deeply about tagging of content. Still not seeing any new questions roll through right now. So with that, once again, I want to say thank you to everybody who has stuck with us and looked at these new features that you can work with and how to manage the Revit content within the Hive space. And we do look forward to seeing you in future webinars. Thank you all very much and have a fantastic day.